Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I thought it'd be fun to do a hypothetical prediction for the 2028 presidential election, and in this matchup I'm doing Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez versus Republican Ron Desantis. AOC being from New York, DeSantis from Florida. I think it'd be an interesting matchup for 2028. I'm not totally sure it's the likeliest outcome given that on the Republican side both JD Vance and Marco Rubio are likely ahead of DeSantis, but AOC is definitely squarely in the mix to be a potential Democratic candidate. So I thought this would be a fun video, and first we're going to start with where things are kind of going nationally. Because right now, President Trump's current approval rating sits at 42.5%, which actually has gone up about nearly 1.5% in the last week, and is up about 2 points in the last month. Now, just to give you a comparison of this, I want to take a look back at some previous presidential elections and approval ratings for people like, for instance, President Obama. President Obama heading into 2014, obviously was the midterm year. He ended up the year overall down about 10.4%, which is pretty much exactly where President Trump is right now. We could even look exactly on the day. I'm recording this video just for transparency reasons on July 14th. So obviously, I think I'll be seeing this probably like the 20th, but on July 14th even, or even July 17th, Obama's approval rating was down roughly about 13% in the United States. So we don't know how it's going to trend overall for President Trump, if it'll get better or worse over time. But Obama wasn't in a too dissimilar situation from where he was. We can look at Trump's first term as well in 2018. He was also down about 10.7% at this current point in time. So again, even Trump in his own first term ended up being relatively similar. President Biden we can look at as well. We can look for July 15th or so, 2022, Biden was down about 17.7%. So Biden around 38.4, 56.1% disapprove. Biden was actually a little bit lower than President Trump is now. And we can also look at President Bush. Obviously in the first term, 9/11 really heavily inflated his approval ratings. More so in the second term, especially in comparison to President Trump as a Republican president with negative approval ratings. We can compare to Bush here. And you can look right around the same metric here. July 13th, Bush was down about 18.5%. So Trump is running about maybe 4% or so to 6% higher than Bush and Biden were, but he's relatively in lockstep with where Obama was during his second term. So what does this mean? Well, I think context is very important here, because when we look, say we can go back to 2008, Bush's approval rating really bottomed out after that. He was down about 18 points. Then by the time he left office, he was down about 35.6. Now for Joe Biden, again, he was down about, I think I said 18 points or so, or at that time, he ended up being down about 15.7%, only at a 40.4% job approval. For President Trump's first term, Trump actually modestly went up in support throughout his first term, even though he still ended up being down about 8.7%. And Trump was also eligible to run for re-election in 2020, which he did. That's a big thing. Having an incumbent run for re-election probably gave Trump a better chance at winning than, say, a new Republican candidate would have. Now for Obama, he ended his first term, or his second term in 2016, up about 3.3. In 2012, up about 1.3. So Obama's a rare case where he actually finished with an approval rating that was positive. But even still, it still didn't go the way for the Democrats with Hillary Clinton. So I think the candidates do matter is the point I'm trying to make. But obviously 2008, President Bush's approval rating is terrible. The Democrats, Barack Obama, wins in a massive landslide. 2012, Obama's approval rating is relatively close to even. He wins in a, honestly, what kind of in between like a landslide and a competitive election. Not really like a Trump level competitive election, but Obama, 332 electoral votes, a pretty decisive win. 2016, very close election between President Trump and Hillary Clinton, 306 to 232. Popular votes actually won by Hillary Clinton, about a 2-point win for the Democrat. Close race, the Democrats narrowly lose that to President Trump. 2020, another close race, 306 to 232 once again, but on the Democratic side. Biden got about 51.3, Trump 46.9 on the popular vote. And then 2024, President Trump, he only gains electorally about 6 more electoral votes from his 2016 victory, going up to 312. But Trump wins the popular vote, the first Republican to do so, so I think it was Bush in 2004. So Trump wins the popular vote, gets 49.8%, 48.3% for the Democrat, Kamala Harris, but a 1.5% win. Trump gets up to 312. So why am I talking about all this at the start of the video? Well, because I think it's important for the context of 2028 is we won't know what President Trump's approval ratings will end up being for 2028, which I think will have a massive impact on the election. If President Trump bottoms out the way President Bush did in his second term, we're going to see like a Democratic like tsunami tidal wave type of win. If President Trump continues to rebound and maybe get into that 44-45% range like he did in his first term, it's going to be a really competitive election in 2028. I think both candidates can certainly win if that's the case. I think the Democrats will still be slightly favored, but it's possible. And if President Trump somehow miraculously rebounds a lot in the approval over the next 2 years, it would be atypical given what his first term and second term have looked like thus far. It's possible the Republicans could just win outright and have 2 consecutive terms of a Republican president back-to-back. For 2028 right now, for what I think generic AOC versus DeSantis would look like, with Trump's approval rating around 42.5%. Again, in 2020, Trump's approval rating was about 46.9% of the vote, but in 2024, it was about 49.8%. I think we're going to see Republicans get around at least 47% of the vote. Even in 2016, Hillary Clinton got about 48.2%. Joe Biden got about 51.3%. Kamala Harris 48.3%. We know the Democrats are going to get above 48% of the vote. The question is going to be, what are like the remaining, 48, 43, what do the remaining 9% or so ultimately do? Do they vote third party? Do they go one way or the other for the Democrat or Republican? That's going to be the main question for 2026. So first things first, let's get into for 2028, excuse me. Let's get into the electoral map because now we're already like 7 minutes in. So for the electoral map for AOC versus Ron DeSantis, I think we're going to see a lot of states continue to remain the way they would. In an election environment, I think AOC would win the popular vote. Probably like Biden won it. Let's see. Biden won it by about 4.3%. I don't know if AOC would win it that much, but Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump in the popular vote about 2%. I think AOC would be kind of somewhere in between like a 3 to 3.5% win on the popular vote. So I think we'd see AOC win Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii safe Democrat, as she would. Colorado would go safe Democrat. New Mexico, I think we'll come back to. I don't think it'll be safe. Illinois would be safe. Maryland and Delaware would be safe. DC as well. Connecticut would be safe. Vermont would be safe. All of New England minus New Hampshire and Maine would go safe. The first district for Maine would go safe. New York for AOC versus DeSantis. I don't think DeSantis would have a lot of those same appeals to the working class voters that Trump will. So I think it'll hurt him in some places. So I think New York would go over 15 points. New Jersey may just fall under 15. It voted for Harris by only 6 points in 2020, but Biden won it by about 15.9. So I think it might be a case of like a 14-point win. So I'd put New Jersey as likely Democrat just under that margin. I think Virginia would probably go in that similar category as well, where Harris won it by 5.8. Biden won it by about 10. I think we saw the governor's race, how that won. I think we're probably looking around like a double-digit Virginia win for AOC over DeSantis as well. Probably like 11% maybe in Virginia. Maine at large, I think, would be a likely Democratic win as well. Let's see here. New Mexico and Minnesota, I think, would both be under 10%. It voted for Harris by 6 in 2020. New Mexico, 10.8 for Biden, 7.1 in 2020. So I think both of these states would fall under that margin of 10 points, but I think they'd both go likely Democratic. This would get AOC up to about 221 electoral votes relatively decisively. Now, there's a few states I think could be in the likely Democratic category that are kind of right around there. I think New Hampshire is one of them. It voted for Biden by 7.4 in 2020. It voted for Harris over Trump about 2.8. So New Hampshire is going to be an interesting state to watch because out of the three most recent presidential elections, it was under 1 point in 2016, it was 7 points in 2020, and then it was 2.8 in 2024. What it would do for DeSantis versus AOC is going to be really interesting. New Hampshire is a state that seems to kind of like the more establishment, like moderate type candidate, like Shaheen, Hassan, Sununu, Ayotte. It's not really I would say, super progressive type state. So it'd be interesting to see what AOC at the top of the ticket would look like. I still think, though, it's possible it'd be like a 4.5 to a 5-point win. So I'm going to put it in lean Democrat, but I think it certainly could fall over that and go like a likely Democratic win. Now let's get into some of the states I think are going to be safe for the Republicans. Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, North and South Dakota, Nebraska's 3rd district at large, and the state itself will be safe. Oklahoma will be safe. Louisiana will be. Arkansas will be. West Virginia certainly will. Indiana, I think, will as well. Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama will be safe. Some of these states like Mississippi, Kansas, Missouri have potential of falling under 15 points, but I don't think they ultimately will. In 2020, some of them came close. Kansas did. Mississippi almost did. Missouri almost did as well. So it's possible, but I don't think AOC would do as well as Biden in terms of those percentages, even with Trump's approval rating. So I think we'll see DeSantis hold Missouri and Mississippi over 15. I think we may see Kansas fall under 15 points. I think South Carolina would maybe as well. The 1st district in Nebraska is going to be an interesting one to watch because it trended towards Kamala Harris actually a good amount. It went 14.9% for Trump in 2020. It then voted for Harris by about 13. So in an election that was more Republican, it still trended to the Democratic side. So that could be a potential thing to watch for in terms of a shift. But I think DeSantis would win it by over 10, but under 15. And then DeSantis starts out at 118. Now we have some states I think are also in that similar mold of being likely Republican states, maybe right around 10 points or falling under that. I think the first state to look at would be the state of Texas. It voted for Trump by 13.7% in 2024, only voted for Trump by 5.6% in 2020. So it's kind of a state that's going to be kind of a wild card in terms of the margin of victory. I think DeSantis would win it right around like a 9.5 point victory. I think he would lose a little bit of support, but I think it would still be a pretty decisive Republican win. Florida, the governor's race for DeSantis was over 15 points, but I think in a presidential race, it'll be more nationalized. It'll be higher voter turnout. I think Florida will fall under 15 points for DeSantis, but he should win his home state. Trump won it by 13 points. DeSantis should win it at least by like 10 to 11 points probably. So I think Florida will remain likely red. The state of Montana, Montana was back and forth on safe or likely because I voted for Trump about 20 points in 2024, 16.4 in 2020. It's a state that may be like a potential sleeper of like trending towards the Democrats, but I think Republicans hold it by over 15 points for DeSantis versus AOC. Now we get into some states that were Obama states in 2008 and 2012, and then Trump states in 16, 20, and 2024. Of course, we're talking about Iowa, Ohio. Obama in 2012 won Iowa by 5.8, Ohio by 3. 2016, Trump wins them both 9.4, 8.1. 2020, 8 points in Iowa, 8 points in Ohio. 2024, 13 points in Iowa for Trump, 11 points for Trump in Ohio. They're going to be interesting because I think there might be a little bit more of a shift back towards the Democrats without Trump at the top of the ticket. I don't think DeSantis will appeal to working class voters as well as Trump would, but I think he still wins them by over 5 points. So I'd still put Ohio or Iowa and Ohio in likely red, though I'm not totally sure what margin they end up being. I think they stay over 5 points. Also, Nebraska's 2nd district as well, I forgot to include. It voted for Harris about 4.7%, voted for Biden about 6.6%. This is the Omaha area. It's been trending blue the last few election cycles. I think we see it go over 5 points for AOC. Next, we have Maine's 2nd district, which is it's a rural district. It voted for Trump by 9 points in 2024, voted for Trump by 7.4 in 2020. Even with DeSantis, I think, doing a little bit worse than Trump among working class voters, I think we'd still see him win it by like 5.5 to 6%. So I'd put Maine's 2nd district as likely are. Alaska is going to be an interesting state because the Senate race in 2026 is going to be very close, but Trump won it by 13 points. It went for Trump by 10 points in 2020. It's possible without Mary Paul involved in the race, it won't be too competitive, but I think it at least stays under probably like 12%. So I think DeSantis will win it. I'm not totally sure it's 100% staying over 10 points, but I think it may, but that could be a potential sleeper for a trend in the Democratic direction. So AOC would start out about 226, DeSantis about 219. The remaining states, I do too many Senate videos, I think. Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. 93 electoral votes would be my main toss-up states. You could argue New Hampshire can go in this category as well, though it hasn't voted red since I think 2000. So at that point, I would just say like kind of prove it. Whereas all these states have voted for the opposite party. I think North Carolina was the last one in 2008. So since 2008 and up, they've all voted for both Republican and Democrat since then. New Hampshire, you have to go back to 2000 for that. So I would just say kind of prove me wrong in New Hampshire until that flips. But these states in the yellow color, I think, are the main toss-ups. And let's get into them because there's going to be a lot of important stakes here for what's up for grabs. We can look at the 2024 map. The Rust Belt states, I would say you have to start here because this is where the elections seem to be decided now in U.S. politics. Trump won Wisconsin by 0.86%, Michigan by 1.4%, and Pennsylvania by 1.7%. So even though he carried all three, when he did so larger than his 2016 margins of 0.7, 0.2, and 0.72, Trump did carry all three. Still relatively competitive states, though, and states that in 2020, Biden carried all three. Wisconsin was 0.63, Michigan 2.8, Pennsylvania 1.2. For what DeSantis versus AOC would be, it's an interesting conversation of, we talked about those approval ratings for a reason. President Trump's approval ratings in these states will not do him any favors, and without Trump at the top of the ticket, DeSantis is a governor of Florida. He won't likely have those appeal to the working class voters of these states the same way that Trump will. And AOC, in her case, she is someone that's certainly a more progressive Democrat, more on the farther left side of the party and more on the socialism side of the party. But she's someone in a place like Wisconsin may really drive out the votes in places like Milwaukee and in Madison and Dane County, which may help her in a place like Wisconsin. She may be able to drive out more vote in Detroit and Wayne County in the state. And in Pennsylvania, obviously in the Philadelphia area. So these states are going to be really close between AOC and DeSantis, but I think we may see a situation where DeSantis not having that appeal with the working class voters the same way Trump did. I don't think it's going to revert back to like the Mitt Romney era where it voted for the Democrat Obama by about 7 points, Michigan about 9.5, and Pennsylvania 5.5. I don't think it's going to be that bad for the Republicans, but I think at very least Wisconsin would go over 1 point for AOC. I think Michigan would go over 1 point for AOC. And Pennsylvania, I think, is where things are going to be ultimately decided. I think we see Pennsylvania stay under 1 point, but I think AOC would narrowly hold it. And I think Trump's approval ratings right now are honestly a large reason why. These are three states that literally brought him to the White House in 2024. But only winning Pennsylvania by 1.7% at the largest amount, with Trump's current approval rating sitting around 42.5% as of today. For someone like DeSantis, who's not like a Vance or a Rubio, someone that's not tied to Trump's administration and doesn't have that track record really of working with the administration or the working class voters of these places in the Rust Belt, DeSantis, I think, may just fall a little bit flat of that, and it's going to cause him to lose out on these three very close battleground states. So that's my rationale for the Rust Belt states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. As for North Carolina and Georgia, a little bit more nuanced, because North Carolina, we know the Senate race with Roy Cooper in 2026 is going to be very close. North Carolina voted for Trump about 3.2% in 2024. It voted for Trump only by 1.3% in 2020, and then obviously everyone talks about 2008 where Obama won it by 0.3%. North Carolina, I feel like, is always the state that predictors love to have flip to the Democrats in 2028. It's that and Georgia, I think, are two of the ones that Democrats love to put. And it definitely could. Don't get me wrong. It's always close. It's always competitive. But I think we're still going to see North Carolina stay red in 2028. It may trend towards the Democrats where it's under 2% margin of victory. It may even trend under 1% margin of victory. But I think North Carolina in 2028 will still remain in the Republican category. And I think DeSantis, he may do worse with Trump among working class voters, especially rural voters, but he might do not too bad with them in the suburban areas compared to Trump. And that might give him a little bit of enough of a boost to win a state like North Carolina. Now, Georgia is going to be a little bit more tricky. It voted only about 2.2% for Trump in 2024, about 1 point less than North Carolina. And in 2020, Joe Biden obviously won the state by 0.24%. Kamala Harris, despite losing the state of Georgia to Trump, still got 48.53% of the vote. So she did do a very good job in terms of the African American vote surrounding Fulton County and Atlanta. Kamala Harris did, even losing the state of Georgia. Obviously, she didn't do as well as Biden, but in an election where there's been 4 more years from 2024 to 2028 of population growth in the Fulton County area and the surrounding DeKalb, Gwinnett counties, Henry counties, Georgia's automatically going to be on potential flip watch. Now, this one I think is going to be essentially 50-50 because I don't know if AOC is going to do as well with black turnout as Kamala Harris did, but Ron DeSantis, being the neighboring governor of the state of Florida, will probably help him do better in a lot of these rural areas and suburban areas as well. So Georgia, you could really argue back and forth between AOC or DeSantis for me. I'm going very, very barely tilt Republican in Georgia for DeSantis over AOC, but I think that one's certainly one to watch for as a potential flip. The state of Nevada, I think is one where a large reason President Trump won it in 2024 was what he was able to do in Clark County, where Trump won the state by 3.1% against Kamala Harris. 2020, it voted for Biden by 2.4%, and then 2016, it voted for Clinton by 2.4% as well. Clark County only voted for Harris about 2.6%. It went for Biden by 9.4%. It went for Clinton by 10.7%. I think we're going to see Clark County trend a little bit back towards the Democrats in 2028, and I think AOC would be able to do it just enough to win the state by like right around 1.5%, so I'd put it lean Democrat. Arizona is going to be a little bit of a wild card because it voted in 2024 5.5% for Trump, which is a big shift from the 2020 election of Biden at 0.31, where Trump still got 49% of the vote. Maricopa County went 3.5% for Trump. So I'm going to narrowly give it for DeSantis by about that same 1.5%, but it's going to be close as well. So I have AOC at 276, DeSantis at 262. A very close race, but one I think AOC is slightly favored in. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Leave them all down in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe if you really liked it, and I hope to see you in a future video.